Welcome to Badass Breakthrough. My name is Bridget Bennett. I am your host. I am a high conflict custody and divorce coach, fellow survivor of domestic abuse, and I am here to help you on your way. This show is for those who have found their way navigating co-parenting with a high conflict or narcissistic person, battling it out in family court, feeling like that journey is never going to end, maybe discovering that they are a product of a narcissistic family, and overall for those that are trying to rebuild their life after enduring abuse, whether it was through a relationship or marriage. You're in the right place. This show is for you. So let's get started on this journey together. I remember the day that I finally realized I no longer needed to explain myself. I recognized that no matter what I had said, done, tried to explain to my ex, or how long the messages were that I was writing to try to explain things, I couldn't get him to. He wasn't going to understand. He was going to twist my words. Then I felt like I would get into this place of over-explaining. And it was absolutely exhausting. I look back at that time and I think to myself, what is it that I wanted to accomplish? Why did I feel this need to explain or defend myself, justify my actions? Well, I wanted my ex to see me. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to feel like I was being seen, that I was being understood. And I think that's something that's so common about us humans. We have this desire and need to be validated, to be seen for who we are. And of course, we want people to comprehend us. It's an important aspect of communication, after all. I wanted so desperately at that time in my life for my ex to understand the point that I was trying to express, understand the concerns that I was bringing up. And unfortunately, I found myself where he never was understanding any of those things. And I remember even back then saying to myself, like, what's the point of all of this? What is the point of me sharing all of these words in writing if no matter what I say or do, it doesn't change who he is? He doesn't value me suddenly. And he's not saying, you know what, you're right. Oh, that's a great observation of the kids. Thank you so much for sharing those points with me. It never came. Today, I want to talk about why so many people fall into that pattern of over-explaining themselves, justifying their actions, defending themselves. So for us to talk about that, we have to talk about the JADE method. And if you are new here and unfamiliar with JADE, JADE is simply an acronym for justify, argue, defend, or explain. And we don't do any of those things. We adopt the JADE method when we are communicating with a high conflict person. And high conflict people are more than just a high conflict ex or a narcissistic ex. They can be found in the workplace, in the grocery store, in traffic, all over. When we learn that we don't owe anyone an explanation for our own actions, we don't have to justify the decisions that we're making, you feel free in your life. And this took me a really long time to understand and to ultimately grasp. I know so many of you are struggling with the same thing. Like, if I can only explain why I think this is best for our children, my ex is going to understand. If I can only explain why I don't believe that he is looking out for their best interest. I hate when people use that term. Well, he's clearly saying that I said something that I didn't. And what happens? We get into defending ourselves. And in turn, it becomes this back and forth message. There's a lot of pinging back and forth. You feel absolutely drained, physically, emotionally exhausted. That is by design. A narcissistic high conflict person wants you to feel exhausted because if you are tired, you are therefore easier to manipulate. They know exactly what they're doing. This is not something that is unique to just your ex or that high conflict person that you're encountering. They all behave the same way. That's why their behavior becomes so predictable once you understand it. While I look at why so many of us fall into this pattern, I honestly, I have to go back to my childhood, right? For me, I have to go back to my childhood and understand why was it that I felt this need to explain myself, to defend myself so frequently. As a kid growing up in a narcissistic family system, I never felt heard. My father was narcissistic and was very covert. It's something that if you don't know what you're looking for, you would probably think that it was normal. And my stepmother at the time was the one that was, doing all of his work. She was the disciplinarian, and I'm sure she would say that if anyone were ever to speak to her. She had to step up and do things that my father wasn't doing, she would allege. Now, do I believe that two high conflict narcissistic people can be in a relationship together? Absolutely. I've lived it. Do I think that that's what happened in my childhood? Yes. And I remember how often my stepmother made me feel like I was this bad kid. Either good or bad, there was no shades of gray. And she made me feel like I was a bad kid and I wasn't ever doing things the right way, or I would half-ass it, was her words. I remember saying once to my mom on the phone, I was crying. This was back in the day of payphones, and I was often punished and I wasn't able to speak to my mom. And so I would call her collect from a payphone on my walk to school, and I walked well over a mile to school every day. And I called her on the payphone and I said, Mom, I really don't understand why my stepmom makes me feel like the bad guy all of the time. Am I the bad guy? I remember asking her that. And, she did the best that she could to console me. She was in Denver. I was in Florida. And it's hard to console a child over the phone, right? I think we all can agree with that. But she tried her best. And I was blamed constantly for things going wrong. I grew up walking on eggshells, which, in turn has created a people pleaser in me and codependency. And I think because of those things, I felt like I had to over-explain, show all of my good work in school in order to get praise and love and affection. I had to explain that I did all of my chores and that I had already done that. I had already vacuumed that room. Suddenly there was a little white speck of I don't know what the fuck on the carpet. And my stepmother said I did it wrong. And I had to go back and vacuum the whole entire house, not just that room, the whole house. And the lesson I was being taught from that was from my father and my stepmother that I needed to do things right the first time. If not, I would have to repeat it. That was ingrained in my brain. Talk about how does that create perfectionism in a child, right? You want to know where my perfectionism came from? Probably from that. Probably from that. And so that's where this journey began for me. And I encourage a lot of my clients to look into their own childhood, their own past, their own family systems, to maybe pinpoint or identify where that started for them, where they started to justify, argue, defend, explain, and why they felt they needed to. If we can pinpoint and identify that, well, it's going to be easier to recognize it now when you're doing it with your high conflict ex with whom you have to fucking co-parent. Words were used against me with my high conflict ex. He was great at like twisting my words, taking something that I had said completely out of context and then applying it to whatever point he wanted to argue with me. Twist the narrative, gaslight the fuck out of me. I felt exhausted trying to go back and explain myself or prove I had said something right. How many of you are guilty of going back through messages, scrolling back through emails, trying to find exactly what you said and when you said it? He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what I had said. What was he accomplishing there? Keeping me feeling exhausted, frustrated. And it gets to the point when you get stuck in that of like, you just want it to stop. And then you end up giving in, right? You drop your boundaries. And that happened to me so many times. Physically, mentally, emotionally, I was drained from all of the back and forth of these messages, right? Because I was trying to justify something or argue with him. No, I didn't say that. No, you said you were going to do this. No, you said you were going to give me the money, but you didn't give me the money. No, you said that you would be taking them to Taekwondo on your parenting time, but yet you haven't. Nope, you said it last week. No, that project that was due for the moon phases, you have that paper at your house and I need it in order to help our son complete his work. Can you help me? Yeah, nope, you didn't send it. Can you please send it over? You said last week, right? Was he ever going to give me what I was asking for? Fuck no, he wasn't. No. Because if he didn't do that, he also maintains control. And he knew then I was going to go back and ask him again. So it keeps me stuck in this really toxic, volatile cycle. This is why we implement the JADE method. I got to a point where I gave myself permission to stop explaining. I gave myself permission to accept my own truth, to know that my truth was the truth, and that it didn't matter if anybody else knew or understood that. And, the reason I got to this conclusion was actually not through communication with my ex at all. It was at one point or another, I was explaining over and over and sharing with colleagues that I worked with the things that I was experiencing in, now post-separation abuse. Prior to that, it was my marriage. And many former colleagues would be like, oh, Bridget and her drama again. Bridget's baby daddy just doesn't know how to stop, does he? Well, Bridget, you need to stop explaining things. Somebody said that to me once. And it said, I think it was that moment around then and where someone said that my life sounded like a soap opera. I was like, well, I sure as hell feel like I am in one. A Lifetime movie special. When I gave myself permission to accept my own truth, to not argue, because by arguing, I was trying to get someone else to accept my truth, right? By explaining myself, I was trying to get someone else to accept my truth, my points, my opinions, my perspective. So I gave myself permission to simply be. That I was no longer going to exhaust myself with that endless back and forth. Stop justifying. Stop arguing. Stop defending yourself. Stop explaining yourself to not only your high conflict ex, but to anyone. You owe no one an explanation for anything in your life. And you don't have to justify your actions to a single person, not even to your own children. You don't have to argue with anyone, even your kids. And you don't have to defend who you are, your beliefs, or your actions. I invite you to give yourself permission to let go of that. Let go of the need to feel like you have to justify, argue, defend, or explain. It's liberating, truly. A high conflict person will never, ever see things your way. They are not rational or reasonable people. So I want to leave you with this. You are enough. The way you do things is acceptable, and you don't have to explain it to anyone else. I'm going to give you a task. I want you to write, maybe with a dry erase marker on your mirror, I will not justify, argue, defend myself, or explain or over-explain anything this week. And I want you to look at it every single day. Writing with a dry erase marker on my mirror, a message to myself, got me through the hardest of hards in my life. Those challenging moments where I thought I was going to fucking break. You are unbreakable. You are pliable and bendable. You are flexible. You are not breakable. So go on, implement the JADE method, and let me know how it goes. Let me know how you feel. And I'm sure that at some point, when you share with me how you feel, or even to yourself and you're journaling it, the words free or liberated will come out. If today's episode resonated with you, make sure you share it with someone who needs it. You can find me on all platforms as Coach Bridget B, or at my website, breakingbadasscoaching.com. If you are ready to work more with me in a session, check out some of my guides, learn how to master your documentation, or join my exclusive community, you can do that through the link that'll be in the show notes. I want you to remember, you have survived this far. You've made it through this episode, and you continue to show up. You're going to continue to survive, and I will see you in the next episode.